ahead and introduce you. And thank you all for being here today. And welcome. Um, we're so thankful that Becca Jones could be here today and to share her expertise. And Becca Jones is a director of counseling and wellness at Multnomah University as a licensed professional counselor. She specializes in working with trauma survivors and couples. Prior to her work in counseling and supervision, she has had over 10 years of experience in youth ministry. She is a diehard Blazer fan, go Blazers, and a lover of crosswords, and she enjoys a leisurely walk. In her life and work, she hopes to leave a legacy of compassion and empathy. Welcome, Becca, and we're glad you can share with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Trudy, and thank you, all of you. I had kind of started before you came, Trudy, but I was introducing myself as kind of being from the bank of mental health in building the bridge between theology and mental health. That's where my, I think, last few years of my life, my experience and my perspective, and then also the vantage point for the talk today. I myself have a history of dealing with mental health issues, mainly anxiety, and I'm also the child of someone with severe and persistent mental illness. So this is a topic that's close to my heart. That's often why people get called into this type of work, is because of our lived experience, right? There's the joke that, like, instead of going to therapy like we should, we become therapists. And so I find myself in this work, but I'm so grateful for it. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. I also want to address, if any of you saw the panel last night about Dr. Potter's comment, what are we talking about here? When we say mental illness, right, or mental health, for me, as I'm talking today from the perspective of being a therapist, what I'm trying to address is just the experience of mental anguish or emotional suffering that I think all of us can find ourselves on in this spectrum. It's a pretty broad strokes topic today. So I want to own that. I also want to own the fact that where I'm speaking from is from a mental health, like a clinical mental health provider perspective, which is just one peek into how we care for this aspect of our personhood. And so by no means is what I'm saying today, do I feel like it's a full authority or a full picture on all mental health or all ways of addressing it. But just from my own experience, I want to share some thoughts. So I'm going to share screen and hope for the best. And while I'm doing that, I just want to acknowledge, let me see here. Uh-oh, here we go. How sick of Zoom reality I am. I don't know if anybody else is. But it'll be almost a year. I have taught classes, I have done therapy over Zoom. And so I just wish that we could be bodies in the same room together. So I'm grateful to be with you in this reality. I'm joining you from my bedroom/office. But I just want to acknowledge that there's a factor, and even as what we're talking about today, we're talking about connection. And I just want to acknowledge how disconnected this last year has been. But the topic for today is, it's okay to not be okay. And this is something that's really near and dear to my heart, because I want to talk about some areas of major themes that I see in dealing with clients as they are addressing their mental health. The two themes that I want to talk about, two messages that I hear over and over again in my office, is one, if only people knew what I was dealing with, ... And we fill in the blank of the ... what they're saying is they would reject me. Um, if people only knew what was really inside, they would reject me. The other theme is that if I go there, if I address the despair, the hurt, the wounds that I'm carrying, I will never make it back, right? So these two things that I hear from people over and over again is this deep sense of loneliness in their suffering, feeling like their experience no one else shares. And also this sense that there's aspects of our personhood that are not able to be redeemed. That's kind of my interpretation of those two things. I think what's interesting about this is I have worked with people in my practice, is that uh, sometimes I will hear this in session after session, and I just wish so badly that I could be like, why don't you stay on the couch and I'll bring the next person in so they can also say that they feel very alone in their suffering, because it's actually one of the things that we share the most, it feels like, is this sense that um, part of our suffering, part of our struggle, that no one else understands or everybody else has figured it out somehow. And so I just want to acknowledge that these two major themes. To me, the antidote that I would love to propose um, is one, empathy, to be with, and the other one is to promote self-compassion, a gentle witnessing. For me, these two things have been major themes that I have come to understand in the incarnation of Jesus, that he gives us a model for empathy, for being with, and for gentle invitation to change. And yet, I have also found in working with predominantly Christian clients that they experience the least amount of empathy and the least permission for self-compassion within the church and from other Christians. And so this is kind of the challenge, right? As I'm thinking about this metaphor of building a bridge, to me, these are the stones that I'm hoping that we can figure out how to build together. And I just want to talk about them today. I think that when we talk about empathy, that first trait, that first antidote, I think about that there's some really great work that lots of people do on shame and empathy. This comes from Brene Brown, where she talks about this idea of connection, right? If we look at it as a continuum, the opposite end of shame is empathy, right? So the more empathy that we can experience, the more connected that we feel, the more highly connected we feel to the other, and the less shame that we feel. She defines shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are deeply flawed and therefore we are unworthy of, oh, sorry, I should actually read the definition on here. Here, let me go back. So therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So something we've done, something we've experienced or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection. We've talked about this already in the panel, in the session that I was in previously, which I was so grateful for. That our experience of shame, our experience of feeling alone in our struggle, right? That there's something about us that prohibits us from connection, is an intensely painful experience, right? And it creates this question about our inherent value and worth. And I find that this is at the heart of so much of what brings people in to seek therapy and at the heart of many different mental health struggles. I'm wondering how that sits with you all. I know we're going to have time for questions, but I'd love for a few people to raise their hand, maybe one or two at this point, to get a sense of how is this sitting with you as we talk about these two themes and the antidotes, the potential antidotes.
Can I say something, Becca?
Yeah, I don't know who that's speaking, so
Emily.
Emily. Hello, Emily.
I think that connects to me a lot. Recently, 'cause I attend therapy, and I have for a very long time. I have some physical autoimmune issues that sparked when I was younger. But with that, also, I went through depression because of the circumstances. And now I have anxiety from, not just this year, but other things. But I recently realized I was reading Brown's book actually for a class.
Yeah.
And as a perfectionist, shame walks hand in hand with that. And I realized though I've worked through a lot of things, you just keep growing. And it's not that I thought I had everything together, but you just keep kind of working on that foundation. And shame is not only something that a perfectionist has because you realize that you can never measure up, but with anxiety, um, I think that mental illness and physical, it doesn't really matter which it is. You kind of want to hide it for some reason.
Yes.
You don't want to reach out at first, especially if you've had a incident with a church, which unfortunately I've had. I was actually speaking about that in Shive's session, that if you've had an incident where someone does shame you for it because of something, you want to hide it even more and not reach out about it. And ultimately, you want someone to come beside you and just say, I'm here to listen, not fix it. I mean, sometimes you want someone to offer you not a solution, but hey, have you tried this? But often that's someone who's already walked it.
Yes.
And I've had people that have walked beside me and say, hey, maybe you should try this. But those are the people that have walked a very similar path.
Yes.
But most of the time, I just want someone to listen and have and just say, I'm here.
Yeah.
And so that your shame, for some reason, is just not, they bring it out to open that you don't have to have that shame.
Right. Yeah, that witness can eradicate that, right? Versus the opposite, which I have found that shame begets shame, right? You've had a shameful experience and then it makes you hide it more, which creates more shame. And then it kind of can snowball in that way. Emily, thank you so much for sharing. I see some of my own story in that, and I imagine that there's more of us that do as well. Yeah, I want us to hold space for this because I think that when we think about Emmanuel, God with us, when we think about the empathy of Christ, sometimes I think it's so common in our experience in the church that we actually don't connect with how deeply profound that is. The emotional experience of either feeling with or feeling alone in our suffering. Child psychologist Tina Payne Bryson says, what turns adversity into trauma is the absence of support, right? So we're even looking at when we face issues that are tough or overwhelming, how we create resilience is this sense of witness, this sense of connection. And so it's an incredibly powerful thing that I think we need. And it's at the heart as well of the gospel. I think of Ephesians 2, where it says, through the blood of Christ, we've been brought near to God, right? We were once far away, but we were brought near. This reconnection and this sense of witness is the heart of the gospel. And I think it's also what's needed for health and healing. I'd like to watch a video that I'm hoping the sound works for it. And I want to acknowledge that it can be difficult to watch on some level. This is not meant to be traumatizing or triggering for us, but this is a still face experiment, which addresses the need for us from a very early age to feel connected to others, right? And what I'd like us to do is just notice what's happening in our bodies as we watch this, right? And so we will play this. Please, somebody, maybe Cookie, because you're in my, I can see you. If you give me a thumbs up if you can hear the audio, okay?
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
So I would love to just check in to see how that hits each one of you. As you noticed what was happening inside of your body, I'd love to hear from a few of you of what that was like to watch. I want to acknowledge that I'm 8.5 months pregnant. And so when I watched that again yesterday, as I was prepping the slideshow, I wept. And I don't know if that's the hormones or just the acknowledgement that this connection, this need for connection is so inherent. It's the way that God made us. And I really think it's this call back to his desire to be with us, right? That we feel so much distress when we are disconnected from the other. But I'd love to hear from one or two of you of how that hit you, just watching that.
Feel free to unmute and
Mhm.
give a response.
I'll share. I didn't become a believer, a follower of Jesus until I was 35 years old.
Mhm.
And in my early childhood, part of my story is, mental illness in my family. And I think that when I saw that baby, I was thinking about, even me at 15, maybe. and how you're trying to do what you can do, what you need to do, and it seems like you're not received, or you don't matter, or a whole host of other things. And earlier on when you were talking, I was thinking about the book that is titled Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Really Am?
Yeah.
And in that beginning of that book, there is a line that says, why am I afraid to tell you who I am, who I really am? Well, because if I do, it's all that I have. And what if
Yeah.
you don't like me?
Yeah.
And I thought, I was thinking of that connection as I was watching that little one, and just, glad it only went on for 2 minutes.
Yes. It's so grateful for that moment of repair, right? Where the mom warms up and you see the baby just like soften, like, oh, thank goodness you're back.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Is there maybe one more that wants to share?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting when he was explaining the 3 different things. So it's like you have the normal interaction, and then you have this moment where the mom's like not interacting, but then it comes back, or the like ugly or bad, the last one, when that doesn't happen. Because I feel like there are going to be times, like that you maybe aren't able to like show up well, or like there's a disconnect. But if there's that repair, there's like the redemption of that. It can be like really healing, but in situations or relationships when that doesn't happen, like what are those long-term effects of that?
Yeah.
And it's like, is it the baby's fault? Is it the mom's fault? Like, and you kind of like figure out how to cope with that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that, like Carly said there, we can't, in relationships, especially human relationships, there is the presence of rupture, and it's whether or not we can repair that highlights that sense of health, not whether or not there is rupture. That's just a given. But just to acknowledge the experience for some folks is that at some point or at many points in their life, there was not a repair. And I think I just want to acknowledge that I have, as I have studied and moved into this realm of mental health counseling, I have my work has reinformed my reading of the gospel as this God's faithfulness in this attempt to repair with us. He's like, okay, you keep rupturing, but like, I'm coming after you, and how beautiful that is. But I want to acknowledge too that for some of us, our experience of rupture and wounding in this area has shaped our image of that God. And so there's just some tension there for sure. I'm aware of the time. Trudy, can you remind me, are we supposed to be done at 20 after?
20, yeah, 11:20. So we have about 20 more minutes.
Okay. I want to leave time for some questions, but I also want to go back to this slideshow. So let me see if I can. Oh no, I always do that. Okay. I think also that our experience of whether or not we experience connection or rejection in relationship can also be internalized to create this really powerful relationship that we have to ourselves. This is from the Elder Statesman by T.S. Eliot, highlighting the inner critic that we all have, the way we talk to ourselves about ourselves. What is this self inside us, this silent observer, severe and speechless critic who can terrorize us and urge us to futile activity, and in the end, judge us still more severely for the errors into which his own reproaches drove us? I think this reminds me of what Paul talks about in Romans 7, when he's like, what is this part of me I know what I want to do, and yet I keep not doing it. And I like just the tension there, right? And this frustration with this internal struggle. In order to do work to heal, we have to look inside of ourselves, right? This is a quote from Martin Buber, who I love. We can be redeemed only to the extent to which we see ourselves, that we're willing to look inside. But I want to acknowledge that when we've experienced shame and judgment on the outside, we internalize that and we begin to shame and judge on the inside as well. One of the things that I have hit the most tension against, and I'm kind of in a way asking for someone who stands on the bank of theology in this relationship to help me build this bridge, but is resistance to being gentle with ourselves, resistance to being showing compassion when we look inside. And I think some of that resistance can come from this idea that that for many of us, we're in the tension between being, God's beloved and also very broken and sinful. And how do we sit in that tension well, while also promoting healing? I think that this is a question that feels like it's not fully answered for me yet. But what I will say is that when clients look inside of themselves, what I have found that works to promote healing is gentleness. Instead of calling out the things that are wrong, right? Or the things that we want to change, or the things that we're struggling with, we want to call them in. The image that I often get of how we cope instead of with gentleness is like trying to just stifle the things that we are struggling with and hold them down like 100 ping pong balls underwater. If you can picture that, they just start popping up in time, right? And so that energy of saying, I hate these parts of myself that are not the way that I want them to be. I hate what I see when I look inside of myself, I think creates actually more problem than it does good. And I think it also, in some ways, doesn't allow for the grace of God. This image or this idea that there are parts of us that cannot be redeemed. And I think that sometimes the church can add to this by accepting only parts of ourselves, right? There's a quote from Kurt Thompson, who is the author of, he's a medical doctor, psychiatrist, Christian. He writes a book, The Soul of Shame. And he says, those parts of us that feel most broken and that we keep most hidden are the parts that most desperately need to be known by God, so as to be loved and healed. God came to find Eve and Adam to provide them the opportunity to be known, and he knows, and he knows everything else. For only in those instances when our shamed parts are known do they stand a chance to be redeemed. We can love God, love ourselves, or love others only to the degree that we are known by God and known by others. This ability to be kind of vulnerable and open takes so much courage, but it's also the pathway to healing. And so I think for me, the challenge has been, what are we doing as the church to allow people to be known fully, right? It goes back to that quote, that amazing quote, Cookie, from your book, I think fits right in there. So the pieces that I want to bring our attention to, that I find over and over again in working with this kind of the milieu of Christian clients. So again, reminding you of my context, I run a mental health clinic within a Christian university, right? So the bridge isn't always there, but like our context is there for this idea of the church and theology and also mental health. So some of the areas that kind of push back against empathy and compassion, this growing sense, is one, toxic positivity. Within the church, I think that there is this deep need to silver line our suffering, to find good in everything, to make ourselves feel better, and also to maybe not hold as much space for experiences or feelings that are negative. There's a really wonderful article that I should send along to you all, because we don't have time to read through it like I was hoping to, but it's an article written by a woman who finds her grieving friend in the bathroom of the church. It says that that's often where, like, the only place that grief can really exist, because it's not welcome in the sanctuary where it's meant, where like only celebration can happen there, right? And so she says, from this article, she says, in an effort to relieve pain or distress, some pastors and fellow churchgoers may dismiss the grief, try to lighten it by sharing platitudes, scripture, mantras, or silver lining. She said, they are seeking to relieve their own discomfort as they try to relieve the others. Even if the intentions are to cheer up the person, the message is one that tells the griever that in their process, it isn't okay, or it's taking too long, or it's too much, or it's not spiritually healthy, right? It's a rejection of that process. And so I think that that's one of the areas where we can push back against that, to leave room for people to not be okay.
I add something?
Yeah, totally.
It just made me think, my counselor had me read a book called The Happiness Trap. And although it's not Christian, it's very much along the lines of that. We often put so much effort in being happy, which is not the same as joy. He is a Christian counselor, but doesn't mean he always, refers me to all the Christian books.
Sure.
Because there is so much out there.
Yes.
And he does come from a, like I said, Christian theological background. But sometimes we just need to sit in our negative and suffering, and we don't need to stay there, of course. But pretending to be happy does a disservice to us. The church can, of course, do a disservice to that as well. But it is about knowing that our negative thoughts sometimes are just there. He's had me literally, he said, well, what if you just let it sit there, put it in a room, let it scream? And I've had to do that before. When I was at one point, not now, suicidal. He's like, well, what if you just put those in a little room and let them be there? Because what harm will they really do to you if they're not what you want? They're not your actual voice and your mental mentality at the time. And then you move on.
I love that, Emily. I think it sounds like you found a great therapist, so you should share his name.
He's wonderful. Yeah.
But I just appreciate that idea of a welcoming, right, versus a stifling of our experiences. And I think that shift I have found to be really, really helpful. So thank you for sharing that. I think the other piece is we talked about this. It actually came up a number of times already, but product over process, valuing someone who has arrived. I think realizing that we are not on the stairway to heaven is a really important piece. And this, what I mean by that is that I think we are on the windy road of still being a human. So our redemption process, our sanctification process, it does not make us like God. And this attempt to be that continues to keep us separated and keep us in our suffering. And so sometimes I think the church can want us to jump ahead, right? We can put that pressure on ourselves, and we can not invite the messy in there, the messy process. And so, yeah, it goes back to the idea that we've been talking about a lot of the journey, right, that this is on. The other piece that I want to acknowledge, comes from my own experience in pastoral ministry, but the church is an unpleasable parent. I want to address the systemic issue of us not allowing pastors to struggle with mental health issues. And we say, yeah, well, maybe we do, but honestly, I have heard story after story after story of pastors revealing that they're struggling and getting fired or punished for that. And so I just want to acknowledge that if we're in this system where people from the top can't struggle, I'm not sure that there's much of a solution for how we can create struggle in that church system and church body. So my heart goes out to any of you in pastoral ministry. I think it's one of the hardest jobs on this planet. And I hope that you have found a way to deal with your shame and struggle. I imagine what that looks like is just connecting with other pastors at other churches. But I think I just want to address that systemic issue that we have. And then I think the last piece is just the lingering just world philosophy that we can all be so prone to, this belief that if we make the right choices, then things will work out for us. We shouldn't struggle. And so therefore, if someone is struggling, then it's their fault or they've earned it in some way. I think that just lingers. It lingers in church as well, because we're humans making up the body. And so I think it also can lead us to, or leave us in judgment of one another, instead of acknowledging the fact that because we're in a broken world, really, really bad things happen to good people, and really good things happen to bad people. It's not, the world itself is not just, even though God is. And so I think that I have noticed that at the heart of some of this difficulty in accepting one another, right? Is we're, yeah. So I have one more video to show, but for the sake of time, I would love to instead leave it up for comments or questions, to just hear how this is sitting with you all. You can please unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand.
We have about 5 more minutes, Emily. So if you're done with the screen share, it might give us more access.
Oh yes, you
people.
told me to do that and I didn't do that, sorry.
I'm here to support you.
Yes, so glad.
And feel free to bring yourself back on video if you feel feel okay about that, to give that visual connection. That sometimes helps in these discussions. One thing about New Wine is that we love dialogue and conversation. So feel free to unmute and share with Becca.
Yeah, I can just relate to a lot. I'm trying to think of what to say because I have so many different thoughts coming back and forth. But some are from the ministry world, where I've kind of been assistant, associate leader in churches and parachurch organizations for a long time, and intersected with mental illness and struggles multiple times with different people, and often felt like just completely under-resourced.
Yes.
And also maybe some lingering hesitancy. This was talked about last night. I think maybe Tom Shive mentioned it, or somebody else, but just I probably coming from a part of the church that had like a lot of hesitancy towards any kind of, professional counseling, some kinds of medical care, even especially psychiatric and psychological pieces. So there's that. So when you're talking, that's something that I'm thinking about, is just, how do we do better at this? This seems so fundamental to who we are as human beings, and also as image bearers and people who are,
Yeah, I love that. And that question, how do we do better, is like my favorite question, right? Like I think it's so important, and I'm so grateful that you're asking that. Just how do we do better? I also want to acknowledge historically, mental health and kind of this concept of mind is in some ways really new. Um, you know, we we burned people at the stakes for this type of stuff. Like this is not, and that's in our recent history. So I think like I was thinking a lot about that, just historically what we are facing also, right, of stigma around some of that. Yeah.
Can I piggyback off what Isaiah said?
Oh yeah, Haruka was going to share, and then Emily.
Okay.
Did I say that right, Haruka?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm coming from Japan. Yeah. And then like it's such a stigma attached to the mental health thing.
Yes.
And then like, my father is a schizophrenia. We just
Yes.
held so much. I felt like my mother was like hiding so much. And then she is like talking only me. I mean, like I'm just growing up with like her only like, friends to talk about this.
Yes.
So, and then also even for like, I'm privileged to, go to college and stuff, but still, even for my friends and close friends don't know my father's illness.
Yes.
So it's like, I don't know, I'm not religious. I'm just that this is the first time I'm in, but I'm thinking about this, like a spouse and also the, children's, this trauma thing, even for like, I'm thinking about this is 50 years ago, I was growing up. And then like, maybe it's affecting my relationship with my mother, my relationship, with my younger sister. So, and then still like lingering on this. So I need to think about this. So that's why I'm glad that I'm in this your thing and also the previous thing that's the Chris,
Yes.
the breakout room. So I'm glad that I was able to come in.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
And I'm so glad you're here too, because I myself being the child of watching my father struggle and often feeling like that was impacting me far too young, right? Feeling that I feel for you, and I'm so glad you're here. Yeah, if there's lingering that goes beyond this, please reach out. I'd love to continue that. Thank you.
And also like, I never know about my father because
Yeah.
he became this illness when I was like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old.
Right.
So I didn't have a connection. I only have remember that. And then my younger sister, my father was, became the illness. So she didn't have any connection at all. So which is like, so yeah, it's like really still thinking about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for joining us, Ruka. Emily, did you?
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I know we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Just the emphasis that, it's only a generation or two that the theory and the mindset is, we'll just get through it, suck it up. I mean, even my own parents who, that is their mentality. And they think that our generation, the emphasis of mental health is overdone, which, I mean, for some people, I don't want to say that it is, but we do emphasize it so much more, which I think is a great thing. But they just cannot fathom that it is a big deal and that we should emphasize it more, that we just need to get over it. Well, we can't. I can't just, talk myself out of a panic attack. I have to walk through the storm, which is difficult. And you can't just do that. You can't just suck it up and get through it.
Right.
But that was only a generation or two ago.
Totally. Trudy, I saw that 2-minute warning.
Yes, 2 minutes.
Is that right?
Mhm.
Yeah, Emily, I appreciate you saying that, because I do think that like suck it up willpower piece, like just will yourself to not feel that way, I think can really harm those of us who are struggling, yeah. Well, I am seeing the thing pop up in my face. So I know we're going to be sucked back to the main session. I just want to say with such gratitude, thank you for being here. I have so enjoyed this conference. Part of me really wanted to be in Eric's session this hour, and I so look forward to watching that tape of how we can be a part of the solution. I think that your willingness to engage in this, whatever bank of the experience you're on, right? Whether it's personal mental health experience or caring for those, starting this conversation, I'm so grateful for New Wine. Thank you, Trudy, for doing that and inviting me to be a part of it. I also, you can find me on Multnoma's website if you have questions or follow-up, or just want to grab a virtual tea or something, please reach out. And yeah,